Okay, so welcome back. In this episode, I'm going to summarize the best I can one of the longer documents within the 2026 Pentagon release. It's 186 pages long, so it's not really viable to read them all out, although on the podcast, I will go through one or two. I'll state the word quote whenever something is word for word a quote from the case file, and the rest I've made somewhat concise for digestibility. Okay, but to start with, like and subscribe and comment. Also, you might notice it's a bit different in the room at the moment. It's because we're kind of like renovating and decluttering and stuff like that. So this is actually the other side of the room that you see in, and you can see my whiteboard just there. I normally use that for all the calculations and things like that because using paper, you just go through so many bits of paper. It's just wasteful. So, okay. So this starts in July 1947. So there are also, just I'll add in, there are some AI videos in this. I'll do the AI because these are wordy accounts. I feel it does kind of add to it to have that kind of visual representation, but they aren't great. You know, they're not a true representation of the account themselves. So I think it's just for a bit of animation and a bit of fun. So this starts in July 1947, where reports of, and quote, some fast-flying objects were in the air over Portland and vicinity, as reported by an on-duty police officer. The police officer was then interviewed by an FBI agent. It was noted that the police officer was feeding the pigeons, and then, quote, the pigeons became very excited over something and fluttered in the air all at once. And he saw 5 large discs in the air to the east of Portland, 2 discs flying south and 3 discs flying in an easterly direction. He could determine no colour of the discs, but advised they were dipping in an up and down oscillating motion and were travelling at great speed. Apparently they were out of sight before he could make any other observation. So travelling pretty fast, you know, it's especially when you consider this is 1947, so it's not like today's skies where you can see plenty of objects. You know, we have drones now, we have all sorts of things. So back then there was fewer objects in the sky, so things would be slightly more observable. But again, you know, people being people, we don't always have our head in the clouds. We don't look up to the sky. So I think it's quite interesting. He says it is terrific speed as well. He also stated there was no sound or any motivating force, so presumably that implies method of propulsion. The FBI agent then went on to interview a second police officer, who was a sergeant, that looked outside after receiving the report. So the first police officer saw this incident with these 5 unidentified flying objects, and then he sounded like a radio alarm throughout the entire district. And so a lot of these are reports from police officers who heard this and then immediately, when they were outside, looked up, or when they were inside the station, like this incident, where he hears this alarm and then goes outside and then looks up afterwards. So that's why some of these say an alarm, and it's this initial officer radioing to the whole district. Sergeant looked outside after receiving the report and also noted 3 flying discs in a northeasterly direction at, quote, terrific speed. He noted them as having a whitish brown glint. The FBI agent then went on to interview a third police officer who was a patrolman. This police officer was also a former Air Corps pilot during World War II. He stated witnessing 1 disc travelling southwesterly direction. Remember, I think there was 3 from the initial report. 3 went east, 2 went south. He described it as, quote, aluminium in colour, left no vapour trail or smoke trail, and was travelling at terrific speed, faster than he's ever seen any flying object before. He went on to estimate that it could be around 30,000 feet in altitude. He said there was no sound emitted by the flying object either. In the paper, the police officer described the object as, in the newspaper at the time, the police officer went on to describe the object as aluminium or eggshell white, which is quite interesting because that's very similar to the Lonnie Zamora incident, which we've done recently. He did say it didn't flash or reflect light as well, but the eggshell white, that was the Lonnie Zamora one, you know, even the accounts later and further on. So you're talking 60s and 70s. This eggshell white description or aluminium is fairly consistent throughout all these decades. The agent went on to interview a further 2 patrolmen, both World War II veterans with private pilot's licenses. They said also they had heard the radio alert, then looked up to the sky, and they, quote, saw 3 flat round discs having white colour to them. They were again described as travelling at terrific speed in a southerly direction in a straight line, equally spaced formation whereby the last disc was fluttering very rapidly in a sideways arc, estimated at 40,000 feet, and no evidence of motivating powers, vapour or smoke trails. And they were travelling so fast they were, in quote, out of sight before any detailed observation could be made or sound could be heard. In the newspaper, these men both reported the objects as erratic and changed direction in flight. But they also did report flashes of light to these. I have a feeling these flashes of light is just their location in relation to where the sun is and where the object is. And obviously, if it's in an oscillating motion or any object in movement, it could catch glints of the sun and cause them flashes of light. The FBI agent goes on to attest to the sanity of the officers and states that weather conditions being clear with little or no clouds and ground temperature of 82 Fahrenheit or about 28 Celsius. Now, let's go on to the actual newspaper reports at the time as well, and this is on 5th of July 1947 by the Oregon Journal. There was a title of "Prowl Cars Spot Discs in Sky Here." I think the prowl car here is referring to like police car, the patrol cars, like the police patrol cars. It goes on to state that 8 Portland policemen, deputy sheriffs, spotted them, along with numerous citizens, a Coast Guardsman who claims to have photographed one near, I think it was near Seattle, and the crew of United Airlines plane as well. I have to state here, and I referenced this in the Disclosure News video as well that was previously done, that Neil deGrasse Tyson has stated, I love Neil deGrasse Tyson, I think he's fantastic, and he's slightly changed his opinion on these things as well, which is quite interesting, and I addressed it in that video, but he did state that it's no longer farmers, etc., like drunk people coming out of bars and stuff like that that's spotting these. It's pilots, government officials, military officials. And in that episode, I did say that it's always been this way. If you look at the evidence, every decade has had sightings from these types of people, and this sort of incident goes on to illustrate that. Perhaps it's just that there's more global reporting of such things now, or some underlying narrative has changed somewhere along the lines. You know, these are qualified people. Just at the end of the Second World War, and again, at state in this previous video. This is a good starting reference for this point. If the Allies had such any secret tech, it would have been deployed. I mean, as soon as the atom bombs were ready, they were dropped. So, and obviously horrendous, but it shows you a brilliant timestamp to say, look, this is our technology at this time. Also, it's interesting, the descriptions of these objects hasn't really changed. And I'll show you the photograph of the guardsman, and I'm not sure about this. It's a bit tricky because it's such an old camera and a fast object and slow shutter speed, and then the development method. There could be some elongation in this object, hence why it doesn't fully look disc-like. But we'll go into that a little in a little bit, as it may not be all what it seems. The article goes on to state that the police alert came in after already scores of people had called to report the discs overhead, and seconds later 2 prowl cars also reported them, the cases previously. Other reports state from a former Air Corps veteran, and quote, he thought it appeared to be radio controlled because the disc could change direction at a 90-degree angle without difficulty. Again, modern day UFO characteristics here, except this is in 1947. Another report with a captain, a harbour pilot and a patrolman all saw these objects reporting the same things, terrific speed, and quote, the discs would oscillate and sometimes we would see a full disc and then a half moon shape, then nothing at all. The flashes made it hard to discern if there were 3 or 6 objects, and these are not the people who took the photograph, by the way. Further described as looked more like a shiny chromium hubcap off a car which wobbled and disappeared, then reappeared. They even noted there was a plane in the sky at the time, but all were emphatic that the discs were not planes. So you have literally these qualified people, captain, harbour pilot, seeing these in a comparable frame to an actual plane. Furthermore, the reports continue. Titled, Airline Crew Confirms Reports of Flying Discs, 5 Spotted. The captain of an airliner spoke of, quote, 5 somethings which were thin and smooth on the bottom and rough appearing on the top. He stated, we saw them clearly, we followed them in a northwesterly direction for about 45 miles, Finally, the objects disappeared. We were unable to tell whether they outsped us or disintegrated. He continues, we can't say whether they were saucer-like, oval, or anything else, but whatever they were not another aircraft, nor were they smoke or clouds. Another report from the Coast Guardsman, the person who actually took the photograph earlier on, I think it's a bit further north of Portland, could have been Seattle, I think I stated, over Lake Washington. He described the object as a white saucer. Now, the thing is, the object in the photo were only dots on a 7x9-inch photograph. So that's how much they were blown up in terms of the image that we see now. And they were even reported by a photographer as a flaw in the print, therefore implying they weren't the object. I think he may have a point here. If these were just dots on a 7x9-inch photo, it's entirely possible that these were just imperfections, and we could be looking for something in the photo that isn't there. The chance, if they were moving that quick, he could have photographed them also. So I'm kind of leaning towards it's an imperfection in the photo in this one. But the previous account did say half moon shaped as well, and there is a slight thing of that. But I think that's kind of like that could be a deception of the eyes from, again, the light reflection, oscillating object, shadows, that kind of thing. Another report, an amusement park employee saw several objects like spinning discs in the sky. He noted several picnickers and a female pilot spotted them also. Another report in Vancouver in Oregon, not BC this time, 3 deputies heard the patrol alarm, looked at the sky over Portland about 4 or so miles away, probably more. They saw 20 to 30 objects and heard a low humming sound. They did describe these like a flight of geese. So, they could have been geese. Poor bastards, everyone else is seeing fast moving discs making 90-degree turns and everything. And these probably just watch a flock of geese while a UFO passed behind them. It was noted there were people that were doubtful as well in all these cases. But there always are. And I suppose you have to kind of look at it this way. In these circumstances, it's relevant to mention them, but at the end of the day, an account of an eyewitness that has actually seen something has more weight than a person who says, I didn't see anything. There's numerous reports from miles around, and as I say, there was loads of sightings before the policeman actually called this in and raised the alarm, and numerous after that as well. So, and you think about the complexity really of it. If these were fast moving, not everyone would have been looking up in the sky at that precise moment in time in that exact location at the time. So you've got a very narrow scope of when people could have seen these things. And I think this is also part of the problem with the UFO phenomenon in general. If there is an object, you have to assume people are looking at that exact point in the sky at that exact same time as someone else. That's a very narrow window. There was a colonel who noted he didn't see anything suspicious, and there were 23 B-29 bombers near Astoria. Now Astoria, for a start, is nearly 100 miles away, and secondly, a northwesterly direction from Portland, so not the same sort of location as where these were kind of going or where these were kind of sighted. Thirdly, modern planes are quieter than older ones, and you can certainly hear them flying overhead. I can hear jets flying at so many thousand feet, like the ones here, I think maybe 20 to 40,000 feet, sometimes overhead, and you can hear a faint hum in the background. So certainly a B-29 bomber, if that flew over, and I think they've done like an air show previously, and you can really hear it. So 23 B-29 bombers flying overhead, you would have heard that. They wouldn't be stating there was no sound to these objects. One witness who saw something dismissed it as cottonwood blossoms. Again, remember that short time frame and that directional window within the sky. He's basically saying, though, that all these pilots, these policemen, all the accounts of the people that we've seen just saw at most 5 petals falling from a tree at numerous locations around the same time. I think this guy was literally sat staring at a tree and totally missed what was going on around him. Another report stated that he saw an airplane. Then a minute later, the objects, and they looked, quote, like bits of aluminium foil, perhaps cigarette wrappers. So now the pilots, veterans, captains, aircrew, all these were seeing cigarette wrappers. I mean, they were pretty quick cigarette wrappers, doing 90-degree turns in the air to trick pilots and veterans. And yeah, there must have been a very strong wind that day to cause that. So another report states that three objects flew over the Willamette River near the Ross Island Bridge, and they appeared in the west and were travelling so fast that they were out of sight in the east within 2 to 4 seconds. So this is quite interesting because you've got some numbers here, so we can kind of do a little bit of maths on this. So I looked at the location, I calculated the rough visible distance in a worst case and best case scenario. So the lowest speed, shortest distance, and the longest time, that's the shortest visible distance and the longest time to pass over, they would be travelling at around Mach 7 is what I calculated. So, or about 5,400 miles per hour, equivalent to 8,690 kilometres an hour. So the fastest speed, and I've added a limitation of realism here as well, of a visible object in the skyline, if you assume 5 miles in each direction, although it could easily be above 10 in each direction. But for the realistic case, it still works out as about Mach 23.5 or 18,000 miles per hour, equivalent to 28,968 kilometers an hour. If we do take this limit of sight being about 12.5 miles, then the upper speed is actually about Mach 56.3, which is about 43,000 miles per hour, equivalent to about 70,000 kilometers per hour. Now, I've calculated very similar speeds to this in the upper and the reasonable and the upper and lower sort of boundary speeds in a previous video. And I think it was the Syria UFO footage. And these were very similar speeds to this. Like, I'm sure the calculation I came out with was something very similar. And that's fairly consistent for over 75 years apart from each other. This report stated this as a disc with a metallic light glinting in the sunlight. He also stated they didn't appear very high, but also said later on that he and his neighbours saw a single disc-like object flying north, very far away and very high. So there was a second incident that this guy saw this. So I think these are quite interesting, all these cases, because it just goes on, as I say, to illustrate that the credentials of the people back then, like 1947, they weren't just all farmers. They weren't all people coming out of bars drunk. They were people on duty, sober. They were professionals, veterans, that spotted these incidences. And the shape, the thing as well, the consistency with the shape, even the speeds are calculated as well. Now, we'll note some of the statements did say they estimate the speed about 300 miles per hour, 300. And I think, again, though, we kind of see that today in some of these other like UFO type videos of about that speed. So it seems to be perhaps there's several things going on here. Maybe two different types of objects, faster moving ones and other slower ones. I don't know. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.